You know, back in 1968, Neil Diamond at the Greek Theatre in the US, before he started his Hot August Night rendition and songs we've all come to love, made the comment, we're going to have a night tonight where we do things that you won't forget for a while. Well, we're going to have a lunch today where we're going to do some things that I hope you won't forget for a while. Well, so, first of all, with my speech, it's hard for me to give a speech to know what to talk about. I've got too many things I want to tell you about, but I've broken it up into three sections. One to do with politics and government, because that's interesting. I can give you a bit of an insight of what some of the things that go on there, because what they didn't say in my CV, of course, was that I was a member of the LNP for 40 years, and I was the party spokesman for 4 years and a member of their central committee. So I've had a long history with politics, so I can tell you a few funny stories of things that happened there. And I then want to talk a little bit about solutions for Townsville, what we might become and what the future might hold for us, and finish up with a big bang in the end and give you a big announcement about something you're not expecting, you know nothing about, but that's probably all the more, well, it will be all the more exciting when you hear all about it later on today. So today we look at the national scene in Canberra. It's quite a turmoil. We've got the former Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull saying the Liberal Party should expel the former Prime Minister Tony Abbott, and the former Prime Minister Tony Abbott saying they should expel the former Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull. So it seems to be all about them. You know, politicians, they don't fight for you, they fight for each other. And this chaos in our country has been so detrimental, but still Australia comes back, and this year we've got a balanced budget when the Treasury said we couldn't have it. And why is that? That's because of the strength, the resilience and the courage of people like all of you here. Only one person has the authority and the ability to change our destiny in this country, and that's you. You at the ballot box. As I said, I was a member of the House of Representatives, and I was a new member, I hadn't been there before, and I got there with a vote of 50.3% in the 2013 election. I knew nothing much about Parliament, but when I got there, the Speaker sort of sits down the front, and there's a little box to the side of it where 12 people sit from the Labor Party. They're not members of Parliament, they're just staffers that they put in there. Another 12 people sit the other side of where the Speaker is. And I said, well, can I have any people sitting in the box? And they said I couldn't, you know, because they had all the numbers. And what these guys do is that they write the speeches that they pass over to the box to the Labor members to speak and give their speech or to ask a question. And the Liberal Party does the same thing. It's a bit like a Shakespearean play. You know, it's all done by the staffers before you get there. And very few of them reflect the views of their community and the issues that are at hand. At least I used to get one question every 14 days. And people used to listen to that one because that was a real one, right? Labor and Liberal Party used to have Dorothy Dixer questions. A backbencher from the Liberal Party would say to the Minister, oh, Minister, why are you so good? Tell me why you're so good. He said, well, thank you for that question. He said, because I am very good. I'm absolutely fantastic. He said, but Labor, they're so bad. They're very bad. They're extremely bad. Then a backbencher from the Labor Party would say, will you tell us why the Liberals are so bad? Oh, they're very bad. They're bad people, but we are so good. And this would go on, this pattern, day in and day out. It was just a bit too much to take. So I thought, I can't do much work there, so I'll have to go out and stir a few things up elsewhere, which I did. But I remember the time when Tony Abbott was trying to increase the pension age for people to 70. You can imagine a bricklayer in there at 69, slogging away, picking up the cement. He'd certainly last, wouldn't he? I thought to myself, well, maybe they're trying to kill people early before they can get to the pension, you know. But anyway, they wanted to have the pension at 70. So I thought I'd come up with a question. So I got in there and I said to them, well, why don't we link the pension age to the parliamentary entitlement age for superannuation? And the Labor Party said, oh, don't go there, mate. Your Liberal Party said, don't go there, mate, you can't ask that. And they were all horrified that I did that. And I went outside and the press said, well, why did you ask that question? I said, because I thought it'd be the quickest way to bring the pension age down to 39, right? But what did we do when we were in Parliament? We kept Qantas Australian owned. At that time, Qantas was capitalised at $1.8 billion, and the chairman of Qantas wanted to sell it to some people that happened to come from Ireland, the same place he came for, believe it or not, for $1.8 billion. And from me, I could see the company was worth at least $20 billion, and that's what it's capitalised at today. So it was our votes in the Senate that kept Qantas Australian owned. The government at the time wanted to get rid of $10 billion of social security benefits for people under the age of 30 that you couldn't qualify for the dole. And I was concerned it would end up like the United States, with a high crime rate. And a lot of people in a lot of places in Australia, through no fault of their own, have youth unemployment at 50% or more. So what do people do if they can't have basic sustenance? Do we want them raiding our houses or what else? Well, so we're able to stop that happening. We're able to have 30,000 people released into rural communities from detention under the Chev scheme, which we did with Scott Morrison. And they were re-employed at our communities, paid their own way for 5 years, and then were eligible to apply for a permanent visa. So we did a lot of things holding the balance of power. The Financial Review in those days said I was the second most powerful person in the country. I never thought about it like that. You know, we've got some great people in this community that serve the public. We've got Jenny Hill, Cathy O'Toole, all these people that I disagree with. But the one thing they do is they come forward and offer themselves to serve the community. And we've got to respect people from all political persuasions, even people we disagree with. Because the more people that take an interest in our country, we're all the winner. The more people that care about your community makes your life better and enriches your children, creates controversy, creates differences of opinion. You know, sometimes we might get it wrong. Sometimes we mightn't agree, but at least we'll understand each other better if we can come forward and do all these sort of things. But nevertheless, one of the overriding things about politics is greed. You know, greed and you do this and I'll do that for you, mate, and we all sorts of these funny deals. So today I'm going to tell you a couple of anomalies, some of the things that have gone on in politics. You all hear the debate today about electricity prices, how electricity prices are too high. The Liberals say we need a coal-fired power station. The Labor say we need more renewable energy, right? And so do the Greens. It's interesting that all of the Greens funding comes from renewable energy companies. So maybe that's why they say it. But when you look at the electrical costs today, about 50 to 60% of them is made up of energy charges, and between 40 and 60%, depending which state you're at, is made up with network charges. You remember 10 years ago you never paid network charges, it just came on your bill? Then there's no such thing as network charges. How did network charges come about? Well, about 10 years ago, the Labor and Liberal state governments of the country were presented with a report that would cost them about $500 million to revamp the network in this country. But also, foreign corporations, backed by lobbyists, said, well, look, we can scrap the whole thing and we can fix it all up and give you a brand new gold-plated distribution system. He said, it's only going to cost you $45 billion. That's a lot more than $500 million. $45 billion. And the state governments, Liberal and Labor, said, well, where are we going to get $45 billion? Don't worry, we'll give it to you. We'll give you the money. And they did. And they spent $45 billion on our network because it was a government-guaranteed 10% interest rate. So they got $4.5 billion just in interest alone for supplying those funds, while they borrowed it on the US money market at about 2 and 3%, and the Australian government could have borrowed the money for about 2%. So Liberal and Labor Party don't tell you about network charges being the real reason why electricity is so high. Of course it's true. If you have a coal-fired power station, it's going to be cheaper than renewable energy. It's going to be about 10% cheaper. And that 10% is going to flow into about 5% of your power bill. There's a lot of good reasons to have coal-fired power stations in the mix because of their reliability. That's all true. But the critical issue is, what's it cost our electricity for the consumer? So at the moment, for the next 50 years, we're going to have high electricity prices in Australia because we're paying this money out at 10% when it could have been at 2%. And what's more, the contract that they gave for $45 billion developed about 50% of infrastructure that's never been used. We've got power lines going to places where there are no power stations. We've got grids set up where there are no grids. Because how the contract was written, it was up to them to decide what they'd build and supply us. If you look at the same time, a country like the United States of America with a population approaching $300 million, they revamped their entire country and network for the cost of $100 billion. And we were 45 for the 20-odd million Australians. Who got the money? A lot of corporations. A lot of lobbyists made a lot of commission. And there are a lot of donations to our major political parties, the Liberal and the Labor Party. But you don't hear about the Liberal Party or the Labor Party criticising that issue because they're both guilty of it. And that's the real story about electricity prices. That's shocking, really, when you think about it. It puts all of our industry behind the eight ball. And it needs urgent action to correct. And it could be corrected by Parliament moving to set aside that contract, to pay what was owing and to refinance at 2%. And then our electricity prices would come down around about 45%. But they won't do that because they've got no guts. They don't care about you, they just care about each other. But more importantly than that, we can have a look at the NBN. How many people here are using the NBN? Nobody. How much more business? Who thinks they've got more business by having the NBN? Because it only costs the government $55,000 million to have the NBN. And we've all heard about the drought. How much do you think the government spent on the drought? About $1.2 billion. Does that seem the right priority to you, to spend $55,000 million on the NBN that's brought you so many benefits, and nothing to save our farmers who are starving, who are going bankrupt, our banks that are taking over their businesses, the people that are committing suicide? Does that seem to be a problem? If you're in government and you cared about people, you'd be concerned about more than making your internet 1 decibel faster? It doesn't work anyway. Everyone knows it doesn't work, it's got it. But what happened with the $55,000 million? It went to a lot of contractors who paid a lot of lobbyists, a lot of commission for getting the NBN up, that went to a lot of donations for the Labor Party and the Liberal Party. So what could you do with $55,000 billion in this country, rather than piss it up against the wall, which is what those guys did? Yeah? What could you do? You could do a lot to make Australia great again. And you've probably all heard the debate about the submarines, you know, whether we should have these subs or we should have those subs. And the government's now gone to a French company and it's contracted to build submarines from a French submarine, which was a nuclear designed submarine. And it used to have a nuclear power plant in it that would send it at underwater speeds of about 25 to 30 knots. That's what it was designed for. But Cabinet decided in their wisdom that they'd pull out the nuclear powered power plant and they'd replace it with a diesel power plant. And the biggest diesel they could get in that sub meant the sub was going to go along at 4 knots, not 25. Now the Australian Navy and its fleet travels at between 15 and 20 knots at sea. So a submarine that's supposed to screen our fleet is somewhere back there screening the fleet because it can't keep up. It can't keep up with the fleet. But that only cost you another $40 million. Another $40 million of your money. But if it surfaces, it can go at 20 knots. But its survival time on the surface in a conflict is about 30 seconds. That's about the lives of 100 Australians are put in jeopardy by an incompetent government that looks at this sort of situation. At the moment, they haven't finalised the final contract, and they shouldn't. Of course, you can't just pull out a nuclear power plant from a submarine and put in a diesel plant and get the same performance. But one thing it has done, it's meant that Tonga, Fiji, and all these great maritime powers will be competitive in anti-submarine warfare. All of them can buy a 4-horsepower Mercury engine, put it on a tinny, fly above the sub and drop a bomb. Yeah? That's what they've done. But we need to change the priorities in this country, and we need to change them quickly. I'm 64 years of age. I don't know how much longer I'll be on this planet. But I've taken the maximum: too much is given, much is required. And I've had a unique experience in my life, and I thank the country for the opportunities that I've had. So at this stage of my life, I'm not looking to have any political career. I'm just looking to highlight these issues so Australia knows what they are, and that we can get people in Parliament that can be fair dinkum. Fair dinkum like our Anzacs were, went and fought for Australia. And we can cut the bullshit. That's all I hope we can do. But when we look at Australia, we see that 85% of the wealth in this nation is created outside the capital cities. 85% of it. And yet we see that our growth in the capital cities and our amount of public expenditure and incentives in the regions such as Townsville are falling away. That families are broken up in the region where their children have to go to Sydney and Melbourne to find jobs. That the divorce rates are higher in Townsville and Cairns and Mackay, Elizabeth in South Australia, the Latrobe Valley in Victoria, and in the Pilbara, the divorce rate is nearly 40% higher than it is in Sydney and Melbourne. We see an increasing rate of suicides in the regional areas. But this is where the growth comes from for our country. This is where our future can lie. Yet the priority we've got is pretty low on the agenda. And what do we need to do about it? We need to create the incentive. And back in the 1960s, we had zonal taxation. Our party at the next election is saying that we need a 20% lower tax rate in the regions, because that will give people the incentive and companies the incentive to develop our country, not just in Sydney and Melbourne, but right across the nation. If you go to the United States and you want to drive from New York across to Los Angeles, you come across some of the largest enterprises in the world, where the whole country and resources are utilised. But already our regions are providing 85% of our wealth. Think what they could do if they had that help and assistance. Yet some of our hospitals are only used half the time because they haven't got qualified doctors in many of our rural towns. They haven't got engineers to develop some of our roads and our dams and things like that. But imagine if those people, when they left university, could come and work in different countries and towns and staff our hospitals and support what we're doing. Imagine the difference that would make to their lives, and imagine the infrastructure that would give us in growth. And if you've ever tried to drive from Sydney Airport to Sydney CBD or in Melbourne, you know it's so congested. You know the infrastructure is overused. And that's the reason why we want to do this policy, because it'll bring people from the cities where they're not productively employed into the regions where they can be productively employed and provide more growth and more demand for the businesses and the people that are here. So the United Australia Party, one of our main policies is 20% less tax payable in our regions, and we think that'll create more money. You know, all you people who are in business know that every year you've got to pay your provisional tax. That's very strange. What is provisional tax? It's tax you pay to the government before you've made a profit. That sounds pretty good business to be. Before I even provide the service or make a profit, I've got to pay my provisional tax 1 year in advance. And we've been going on doing this in Australia for years and years. But of course, people in other countries don't have to do that. But why do we have to do it? Does that make us more competitive? Or do you remember small businesses always saying, I haven't got enough capital. I haven't got enough money to expand, to employ people, to do enterprise. Why haven't you got enough capital? Because it's taken off the government, not after you've earned it, but before you made the profit. So let's look at provisional tax in this country. $70 billion every year is collected in provisional tax. The Australian borrowing rate at the moment is about 2%. So if that money was paid to the government at the end of the year, after you've earned the money, rather than before the year, when you haven't earned the money, it would cost the government about $1.4 billion. Right? But if that $70 billion was circulating in our economy for 1 year, and the government gets 10% GST every time it rolls over, they get $7 billion. And the economists tell us that money's liable to roll over 4 or 5 times. Do you remember Kevin Rudd? He was a little sort of paunchy fellow with a bald, he's not bald, he was blonde. But he came up with the idea of giving everyone $1,000. And he sent it out. They all got $1,000 and they all bought videos and things from Taiwan and Korea. But that, when Kevin Rudd stimulated our economy with that $1,000, we actually saved us from going into the global crisis because there was more money available that could be spent. Think of how much more money would be available for people in Townsville to spend and create demand for goods and services if they didn't have to pay a whole year's tax in advance. And what's the cost? $1.4 billion to the government. If it rolls over once, the government makes a profit. It's a crazy policy. Why do we have it? Why do we put up with it? Why have we had it for so long? It's time to chuck it out. We live in a country now where the water in the dam of a person or property is not his. He's got to pay. In the drought in New South Wales, I've been talking to farmers, and they say, we need water for irrigation. We need it to grow crops. We can't afford to pay for the water. And I say, what, the water's in your dam? He said, but it's not ours. It's the New South Wales government's. We can't even use it. What sort of a socialist economy are we in? Of course, we're getting more and more socialist every day because we've got the Chinese coming here, the Communist Party over here taking over our resources. And what's going to happen in New South Wales is a lot of farmers, tragedies happen. There's 4,000 properties that have been foreclosed in New South Wales by the banks when the farmers have not failed to meet any financial term of their loan. Well, what's happened because of the drought? The value of the property's gone down. The banks have put a demand on them, making them pay 50% more for the value of the property within 30 days or they've resumed it. Then they put it up for auction and it's sold to a foreign government. And none of that's reviewed by the Foreign Investment Review Board. What happens to our people that are unemployed, their lives are devastated and their lifestyle's lost? So all these things are very critical for our country. How many talks have you been to from people from the Liberal and Labor Party? How many times have they addressed any of these critical problems? Not at all, because they're like ostriches with their heads in the sand. A lot of the members don't know about it, and they don't care because they're there for a political career. They're not there to serve you. Now, if we look at Sydney, we look at Melbourne, we look at Brisbane, and the problems in congestion. If we go to Paris, we go to London or New York, you see they've got fast trains. You can get a fast train up to a 300-kilometre radius of a capital city and you'll be in the CBD in 1 hour. That means they can open up all the land. Land prices in Sydney have gone high. Young people can no longer afford to buy anywhere. I know my daughter has a unit she's renting in Sydney. It's a one-bedroom unit. It really is just one bedroom with a kitchen in it. And it's $1.5 million to buy. And Sydney prices have just gone through the roof. But if people could live 200 kilometres out of the city and be at work in the city within less than 45 minutes, then suddenly all that infrastructure changes. And Australian families and our home ownership has gone down much lower than it was 10 or 15 years ago. All of that can be regenerated, but the roads, the infrastructure, the amount of investment that's required in the city becomes much and much less. So it's just a common sense policy for a practical solution. I'm sick being in business of hearing about ideology, whether you're left, right, middle, wherever you are. You go to the Labor Party, they say, are you in the new right, the new left faction, or you're in the left, right, out? Well, the left, right, out people are the people of Australia. And we've got to change that. That's what we've got to do. Because it's not about philosophy. It's about practical solutions to practical problems. It's about, what I've talked to you about here is about common sense. Common sense. We all know politicians don't have common sense. We know that, don't we? That's a prerequisite for endorsement in most of the other political parties, except for Philip. We know that's the case, We know that's the case, right? So it's bad news. When I was in the House of Representatives, I put forward a private member's bill called the Australian Fund. Senator Burston's bringing it up in the Senate next week. But the Liberal Party and the Labor Party came in a pincer movement and crushed me because I was the only member in the House of Representatives. And I said, that's naughty, but they did it anyway, right? And what was the Australia Fund? It was a fund to be set up by contributions from a whole range of people that could afford it, right? So that when we had a drought, that money could be used to feed livestock, to protect the integrity of the national herd and our national businesses. That's what it was for. It wasn't a fund set up by the Liberal or Labor Party that goes to some council or some project, or you have to fill out that much paper to be considered about. It was a fund that would go directly to the farmer to feed his livestock so that they didn't die, so that he could preserve his income and so he could preserve the industry for this country. Because as John MacArthur brought sheep into Australia, most of our exports have been on the rural sector. It's been the backbone of this country, of our independence and our freedom. It's a question of national security. It's a question of what the Anzacs went to fight for. It's the integrity of our nation. And that's why some of the things I'm talking about now, you'll read in the Murdoch press and everyone what a rotten guy I am and what a disaster I am. Because I believe in this country. My family's got a strong commitment to Australia. 5 of my antecedents have fought in the First World War, the Second World War, and Martin Brewster, who's not here today but was out at Q&I, led the infrastructure in East Timor. They've died at Trabuc, at the Kokoda Trail. All of them have done more than I could ever do. But what it demonstrates is, what can you do for your country? Why shouldn't you do something for your country? Because you're an Australian, because you love Australia, and all of us can contribute. Public service has no reward. We don't want people in public service who are seeking a reward. We want people who are there to serve us, to serve our country that we love. History is the only reward that we get from public service. In North Queensland in particular, we're isolated from the decision-making processes. And because we're isolated from those processes, we're not as relevant as we could be. Do you want decisions made for what's happening here, down in Brisbane or down in Canberra? Or do you want some unionist from Melbourne coming up telling you what to do? Someone that's never worked on the land. Someone that's never realised that enterprise means jobs, that Australians want a fair go. That's what we want in this country, a fair go, so that we can do something for our communities. And we want to be part of that decision making. What can we do, and what are some of the things that the government should be pursuing for North Queensland and Central Queensland? Well, you'll know that the military bases in the Philippines have been closed by the United States government. They're looking to establish other naval bases to serve their political fleet at the moment. But Australia, North Queensland and Central Queensland had a good opportunity if they wanted to grab it. And there'd be $20 billion of investment for establishing the US naval fleet base here in Queensland. But nothing happened. No one approached them. There was no presentation. $20 billion spent in our community would do a lot to boost our industry and raise our demand levels. On a national strategic basis, to have the US fleet based here in North Queensland would protect and defend our country at critical times when we see the Chinese government busily expanding the South China Sea and buying the Port of Darwin. And we see Andrew Robb, the former Liberal minister, being chairman of that company that now owns the Port of Darwin. Yet President Obama announced 2,000 US Marines would be there. So I can imagine in a time of conflict we could have roll-on, roll-off ships. We wouldn't have to re-establish a port at Darwin, you just roll up to the port. So all of these things of national security could happen. But more importantly, when we looked at that proposal, was the US Congress had passed a law, and that law said that the Pacific Fleet and all the fleets of the US Navy now have to be refueled by renewable energy at up to 50%. And of course, where would we find a sugar industry that would want to get some demand or develop some new fuels? Could we find one in North Queensland? Could there be one up here? Could we establish an industry that could be based on that demand level for renewable fuels that could provide the feedstock for that fuel? Of course we could. So with one policy, we could reinvigorate the North, we could reinvigorate our sugar industry, and we could secure Australia's defence. All of those things to me were pretty important. And of course, that's one of the things I think we need to pursue, and need to pursue it very aggressively. Of course, here in Townsville, as you know, with Queensland Nickel, we've still been able to preserve $6 billion of assets. When Queensland Nickel got into liquidation, the liquidator wanted to come in and flatten the place and sell all the assets, but we fought them in court. We stopped that from happening. We preserved that industry here for North Queensland, and that will open next year. But that's not our big announcement today, right? At the moment, we've got 60 people working out there, and we're planning to employ another 100 in February. We've had good discussions with the Port of Townsville, and I think we've reached a good consensus with them. The only real issue we have at the port is there's a berth there that we use, and we spent $250 million putting in infrastructure there. It's the only bulk handling berth in North Queensland, but we got it under a licence from MIM in 1992 before I was involved in the company. And when Queensland Nickel went into liquidation, they moved in and vetoed us having access to it, right? Of course, MIM was then taken over by a company called Glencore. And Glencore is one of the world's biggest producers of nickel. And they don't want any nickel to be developed here in North Queensland because they don't want to compete with them on world markets. So we need action from our government to make sure that assets and Australian assets can use Australian ports to export or import. Otherwise, we can't provide the jobs. At my age, I'm not too concerned about Queensland Nickel for me personally, but we know the devastation it's caused in North Queensland, and we know the potential that's there to create jobs for a lot of families and give them a better standard of living. So now that the assets are preserved, we've got the funds that we could open it, why shouldn't we do it? That's what it boils down to. Because I'm Queensland's wealthiest person, I don't know, worth a few $1 billion here or there, people say to yourself, well, what's it all about really? Life's not about how much money you've got. I can tell you, if you want to be happy in life, it's about three things I found. You need a nice warm place to sleep. And that's not too difficult to find if you really concentrate on it. You need someone that loves you. Now that's it's the hardest journey that I've had in my life, but I'm fortunate I've got someone that loves me, my wife. I hope she does. She tells me she does. I think she does. I like to believe she does, right? But then I look in the mirror every morning, I say, how could anyone love me? How could anyone love me? But I know I love her, and that makes me feel good too. So you've got to have a warm place to sleep, you've got to have someone that loves you, and you've got to have a good meal every day. But beyond that, it's an illusion. I can tell you that because I've been there. I've done that. So we don't want our lives to be lives of distraction. We want them to be lives that are productive, that are producing for our citizens and our community. And that's why we want lives of public service. And that's what I think is very, very important. I would like to see Townsville to be the real gateway to the Barrier Reef. And what we need to do there, we need to change the strand, we need to change the town plan, and we need to have some investment, right? the sort of things you could do are unlimited. If you go to California and other places, you can see where areas of the Strand, you could have a dolphin school. People could come all over the world, swim with the dolphins. You could have resorts going on there. It could be completely alive as a city because it's got a great asset, and that is in Magnetic Island. So we need to reverse all of that. We need to get the government to play a key role in doing that. You remember Paul Hogan, who used to go across the United States and put a prawn on the barbie? It's been a long time. That prawn's been on the barbie too long. We need to get the prawn off the barbie and put a North Queensland steak on there or something. But we need to get it going. You know, that program was so successful. And I was involved in that program when I was with the Australian government when I was a good person. I was in the Liberal Party then, I'm a bad person now. But when I was a good person, right, and I was a good person, I paid my party membership and I did kowtow at various times when I had to. I was involved with that situation, and what happened, of course, was that program was so successful that the Department of Tourism decided they wouldn't run it again because it was so successful. I said to the public servant, well, why is that? He said, well, it increases the risk that it'll be unsuccessful. And of course, if it's unsuccessful, he'll cop it, right? So far better to stop it 20 years ago when it was successful and he got his promotion. You know, but what about you? What about our community? Let's get those promotions going again and make Townsville great as it could be in tourism. But it's up to you, right? Only you can change it. I thought to myself, what can I do at my advanced decrepit ages of 64? I know a lot of you here will say that shouting. Well, what can I? But no. I said, what can I do to do something positive to help and serve this community?
Authorised by Clive Palmer for the United Australia Party, Brisbane.